Hi, this is Jason from Activated, VCE Health and Phys Ed Resources. And this is the second of our video podcasts for the year. Today we're going to be talking about measurement of physical activity. So now that we know how much physical activity people should be doing according to the National Physical Activity Guidelines, how are we going to determine how much physical activity people are actually doing? So there's a couple of ways that we can do it. The first group of measures are called subjective measures, and they rely on a person's recall and their personal perception of physical activity, what it is, and how they're involved in it. It includes things like recall surveys, questionnaires, logbooks, and journals. So a couple of examples are things like the IPAC, the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, which you can get by looking online, or something as simple as this log, which allows people to record on a daily basis what activity they've done, what time of day it was, who participated, what food they ate, etc. The other type of measures are called objective measures, and they use either direct observation or an electronic instrument to record levels of physical activity. So we're talking about things like heart rate monitors, pedometers, accelerometers, or direct observation. So here's a heart rate monitor. It measures heart rate, so intensity of work. It can measure duration, and lots of them now store information so they can record information about frequency. Here's a pedometer. It measures the most common form of physical activity, so walking. So it just simply counts the number of steps that you've taken over a given period of time. So one of the important things for VCE students is that they can determine the most appropriate type of measuring tool depending on the group or individual in question. And to do that, you need to know the advantages and disadvantages. So let's have a look at the advantages of both. Let's start with subjective methods. They allow data from all dimensions of activity to be collected, so we can use them to collect information on the frequency or how often someone is active, how long they're active for, how hard they're working, and what type of activity it is. They're usually really easily administered. They have a very low cost. If you're giving out print surveys, you're talking about the cost of printing, or if it's an online survey, often it's even free, and that way you can email them out and get to a really large group of subjects. There's usually a very low participant burden, and it's great for use with large groups of people. If we look at objective methods, they vary. The advantages vary depending on the instrument being used to collect the data. So if we're talking about direct observation, they allow for collection of data from all dimensions of physical activity. They also allow for collection of data about the context in which that physical activity is taking place. They're useful in a variety of settings, and there's now computer software that makes data collection quite a bit easier. If we look at accelerometers, we're talking about things like Fitbits and Nike Fuel Bands, and there's a Samsung smartwatch that does it, the Pebble, the Jawbone Up. So there's lots of these now. They're very small and non-invasive. The common ones are just a wristband. They have a low participant burden. Once they're set up and going. You don't have to play around with them too much. They assess intensity, frequency, and duration of activity. They record movement in real time. They store data, usually in an online storage site, so people have their own individual accounts and they can keep track of what they've been doing. Some provide participant feedback as you go, so you can set goals and it will tell you when you've reached that goal or set a new personal best, etc. And they assess activity that may be difficult to capture. So in particular, we're talking about incidental physical activity here. Talk about heart rate monitors. They allow for collection of data on intensity and duration, and in some cases now frequency. Again, they're small and non-invasive, and as I said, many store information. And pedometers are inexpensive, really cheap. I know for a while they're giving them away in packets of Special K, so you know they're cheap if they're giving them away for free. They're small and non-invasive. They're easy to use with large groups due to the low cost. They're really useful for detecting changes in the daily number of steps taken. They measure the most common form of physical activity, and they provide us with immediate feedback so we can see if we haven't taken enough steps for today, and so we can actually get up and move around and make sure that we get those 10,000 steps that we should be getting as a minimum each day. So there are disadvantages also of all of these methods. So if we look at the subjective methods are not suitable for children under 10 due to cognitive limitations. And what that means is that they may not be able to understand questions. They may not be able to respond in a way that that you can clearly understand. And they're certainly not going to be able to remember all the little bits of incidental physical activity that they've done over the day. Children's recall is generally quite poor. They're also potentially unsuitable for the elderly for the same reasons, or those with an intellectual disability. They're also unreliable due to social desirability bias, which means that people tend to fill in on a survey or in a log what they think we want to hear from them. So people know really how much physical activity they should be doing, or they know that they should be doing more, and they don't want anyone to think poorly of them, so they'll put in just enough to meet what they think the expectations are. Unfortunately, what that means is that your data is invalid because it's not a true reflection of what that person's done. And at times you might need a trained interviewer to ensure the data's accurate. Again, the advantages of objective methods vary depending on the instrument that you're using. So if we look at direct observation, it's really difficult to do with large groups. You really can only observe 1 to 2 people at a time, and that means that it's very, very highly labour intensive and time consuming. It's intrusive. There's a person sitting there watching, observing, and people are aware that they're being observed. And the presence of that observer might cause reactivity. And what that means is people behave differently than they usually would because they know they're being observed. So in this case, they might be involved in more physical activity or be more engaged in the activity that's taking place because they know that someone is watching and measuring what they're doing. There's also the need in this case really for a trained observer to make sure that this is done properly. And that makes it expensive. If we talk about pedometers, pedometers are a great behaviour change tool because we can look at where we're at. We need to get to 10,000 steps and we can easily get feedback on where we are and make changes. But they only assess one type of activity, and that's walking or jogging or running. They don't record or store data in real time. They're unable to record intensity. So a step is a step. Whether you do it walking, jogging or running, it's still just one step. There's no data regarding frequency, intensity or duration. The energy expenditure estimates that are provided are based on adults and really can't be used for children. And then if we look at accelerometers, they're expensive for use with large groups. So if you're talking about roughly $100 for the cheapest kind of, exercise band or measurement band, if you want to do that with a large group, it makes it really, really difficult. It's not particularly useful for aquatic activities. For whatever reason, they're insensitive to aquatic activities, and they tend to be insensitive to low impact activity. People might forget to wear them, and again, because that band is there, that might cause reactivity. Now, in a sense, that's great, because if that results in people doing more exercise, that's fabulous. But if we're actually trying to gather information about what people really do, then it actually makes your data a little bit unreliable. It's really important that an appropriate measurement tool is chosen to ensure the accuracy and validity of any data collected. Now, the things to consider are the size of the group that's being collected, or is it an individual, the age of the people in the group, does anyone have a disability? Because for argument's sake, you wouldn't use a recall tool if all or a large proportion of the subjects were children under 10. If you had a large group of 100 or so people, you're not going to use an accelerometer because that's going to cost you $100 a pop, and that makes it impossible. So really think carefully about the tool that you use. Understand that they all have their limitations, but that you need to make an on-balance judgment of which is best, which is going to give you the best set of data for the group that you're measuring. Anyway, that's enough for today. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next podcast. That'll be on promotion of physical activity in the social ecological model. You can visit us at activateedvce.com or on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page.